What is experiential therapy? Well, it can include things like art, play, and equine assisted psychotherapy. And that's exactly what I'm talking to Marla Berger of Berger Counseling Services about today. And we're going to talk about how it's so important that we get things out of our brain, into our bodies, and out of our bodies if we want to implement change. Our physical, mental, and emotional health is not just a want, it is a need for happy lives and prosperous businesses. Lift You Up is the podcast where we share inspiring health stories from business owners who are fulfilling their purpose to live their healthiest lives and helping you do the same. From former TV reporter to marketing entrepreneur and content creator, I care about sharing stories that matter and stories that connect us. I'm your host, Tamika Bickham, your health and wellness matchmaker. Well, today I'm so excited to meet virtually and introduce to all of you Marla Berger, who is also here in South Florida, just a little bit further north than I am in Miami. She is the founder of Berger Counseling Services and really has a unique and interesting approach and also background. And first, let me just say welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm definitely excited to learn a little bit more about your personal story. And if you can kind of walk us through your journey, your path that led to your business today.
I have always been a lover of horses. And so that's just something that I've always been really interested in, as well as art. And I really didn't know what that was going to look like because I didn't want to be a jockey. I didn't want to be an starving artist. And so I just knew that those were things that I was really passionate about and just had a lifelong obsession with. When I was 16, my friend John died by suicide. And just a few months after that, I just turned 17, and someone had casually just mentioned the words art therapy. And I was like, that's what I'm going to be. And so in my junior year of high school, I started educating myself about how to become a registered art therapist. And it kind of took off from there. I then went on to University of Florida and got my bachelor's, and then to University of Louisville in Kentucky to get my master's. And while I was there, I started volunteering with a therapeutic riding center. And I just knew like this was nice, but also not quite what I thought therapy and horses could look like. And at the time, this equine assisted psychotherapy program was kind of growing in our nation. And so I got involved in that kind of from very early on and really found that I loved doing instead of talking. And so I do mention John because, again, like he allowed me to kind of learn all of these different things, sadly, because of his death, and really introduced me to, the perils of mental illness and just how much we need to intervene at a really young age so that people don't complete suicide. Instead, feeling like they might have other options.
I'm sorry to hear about your friend John who died of suicide at 16. Was that a catalyst for you to really think about going in this direction?
So not at all. And at the same time, yes. So it took me about 10 years and all of a sudden it clicked. I was like, if someone had said art therapy to me, would I have actually been interested if not for John? But at the time, it wasn't like, that's it. I could help people like nothing like that. It kind of was probably a very subconscious space that I was like, oh, maybe that led to me being open to the term art therapy. It was not conscious at all. It wasn't something I was seeking out, like, oh, I need to be a therapist now to help people. But it just clicked. And so I really attribute, just his openness with talking about mental health issues. This was the very early 90s, and we didn't talk about mental health issues. And so he was very open about that. And I just really took my cue from him and saying, that's who I want to be when I get older, is someone who can talk about really hard things openly. And that was something that, I just took my cue from him and said, well, all right, that's what I'm going to do. And then it just so happened that I thought, therapy would be a good choice. And I'm glad that I did that because I think that he really helped motivate me.
Yeah, and you know what? That brings up a question that's interesting about, being in the early 90s and really these conversations weren't so open. We obviously we barely even had computers in the household, I think, at that time. Never mind social media and everything that we have now. Um, how do you see things have changed as far as talking about mental health from then to now?
So the good thing is that mental health issues have a lot less stigma, so we can really talk about them. Talking about death continues to have quite a lot of stigma, and talking about suicide or substance abuse, huge amounts of stigma as well. But the act of talking about mental health issues and seeking therapy is so much more open now. Um, Social media wise, I am a bit worried because there are so many trends of people thinking that they have diagnoses when they don't.
Mm.
And it kind of muddies the water for the people who actually do have them. And it's much harder sometimes for them to seek help because everyone's like, oh, you don't have that. You're just thinking it's a TikTok trend or something like that. Would maybe actually, yes, they really do. And so for me, there's a little two-edged sword on this one where it's a really good thing that we're talking more about it. And at the same time, I think a lot of people are reading into some of the things that are just being a normal person.
So I'd love to ask your insight around, do you think social media in ways is contributing to more mental health struggles with teens?
I do in the respect that we're not spending enough time in actual communication with other humans. We're not spending enough time in nature. We're not exercising. We're not sleeping. We're doing things like scrolling and clicking that allow our body and our mind to think that we're having these very uh, meaningful moments of connection. But what they are these brief little moments of, I made a choice or I made a connection, but that doesn't actually extend that time of like real deep interpersonal connection. Social media has some really good benefits, but it also has a lot of really negative ones because our ability to sit in boredom, our ability to find things to do, it's a very mindless activity versus a mindful activity. And I think that that's actually a really big problem in today's youth is that there's a real fear of getting things wrong, of doing things wrong. And so it's much easier to manage everything either by text or by doing things through social media because if I didn't like it, I could edit it, change it until it's just the way that I want it.
Very interesting. And when you said that point about like just being able to be bored, it made me think back to my childhood, like being home because I'm my mom's only child, so I didn't grow up with any siblings in the house, and she worked often. So I just remember being home, like I'm bored. There was pretty much the TV or go play outside in the neighborhood.
Yeah. And we're not doing really play outside in the neighborhood anymore. And the way I grew up, we lived on a street and probably my parents had no idea where I was on any given moment, but they knew I'd be in that vicinity. That doesn't exist anymore, really. There's just a real concern, obviously, for children's safety, which is a good thing. And that, again, that double-edged sword of over protection. And what we're seeing is just a huge rise in anxiety with kids because their adults are so anxious and so hovering and not letting their kids make mistakes. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
is part of why we see teens who are so fearful of making mistakes because it felt like the end of the world. And so learning to fail, learning to make mistakes, learning to fall, literally fall, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we kind of took away from our kids. We made things very safe, which sounds good on the surface, but it's okay to fall down and get a scraped knee.
How else do we learn?
Exactly.
I know it was an article in the Wall Street Journal. I can't remember the exact statistics or numbers right now, but it was pretty much saying that there's a much higher instance of feelings of sadness or depression and anxiety in teen girls, but also teen boys, but they saw it much higher than it was, I guess, 20 years ago or something like that. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit, why you think there's higher rates of anxiety.
I think that part of it is we live in a world where there's so much going on, and from one generation to the next, we're really talking completely different languages. And also I can just see the intergenerational space of parents who were like, run with knives, to parents who were so. I mean, we've really gone into the helicopter parent, kind of space. And I think that what that's done is really create within parents, as well, a feeling of just pure anxiety that if I don't do everything right to protect my child, to ensure that they succeed, like that's it. And I'm kind of going to be judged, or my child's life is going to be ruined. And so there isn't the ability even for the parent to fail. And so there's just this long lasting space of anxiety, and it just sits in the family. And so, and this is something where our bodies are then producing hormones that are being triggered, because of that anxiety space, and depressive thoughts and feelings, really typical in teens. I think also we're being more open to looking at that and not just brushing it off as a teen being a teen. And so just like a lot of statistics, sometimes we're just more open to actually seeing it now and acknowledging it. Such as like, theoretically the rates of autism haven't technically really risen, but because people are actually looking, they're finding it. And so we're having these bigger conversations, and we're starting to notice things more.
I want to shift gears just a little bit, still within the same realm, to talk about something that really stood out to me in your bio about experiential therapies, and really understanding what that means.
It kind of sounds like what it is. Experiential therapies means that we're doing something, we're experiencing something. And so in traditional talk therapy, this is it. We're just talking. There's not any doing technically. And a lot of times in traditional talk therapy, we'll talk about what we would like for someone to, a skill maybe that we would like them to go on and do. And then we just hope they remember, hope that it worked out, knowing that just like any time we do something on our own for the first or second or 10th time, probably not going to be doing it very well. We're probably going to forget, all of those things. And so the real basis of experiential therapies is that we're doing something. And so experiential therapies is the kind of the catch-all for art therapy, music therapy, dance and movement, equine assisted psychotherapy, animal assisted therapies. Lots of times we say, oh, well, I'm doing art therapy because I drew today. Well, you're not ever doing therapy unless there's an actual therapist in the room with you. And so, I'll joke around. I'll be like, oh, baby therapy, and get a little cuddle in. But I know that that's not actually therapy. And so we do want to be clear that to do experiential therapies, you have to actually have a trained therapist in the room.
Makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. And they actually have to be trained in the modality that they're talking about. So a lot of people do throw around that idea of doing art therapy because they're a therapist and they add art, but they're actually not allowed to say that they do art therapy because they're not a registered art therapist or expressive arts therapist, and who has a certification credential that says that they are allowed to do art therapy. And so a lot of people kind of bandy these words around a little bit and forget that it really does take a certification to be able to say that you provide those things, which is really important. So My specialties, I am a registered art therapist, I'm a registered play therapist, and I'm advanced certified in equine assisted psychotherapy. So I work with horses as my partners in doing therapy. I do art and play and another modality called sandtray, which kind of falls under that play therapy area, which is a whole bunch of different figures and stones and shells and trees, just kind of anything you can think of, different types of figures, figurines, things like that. And then a really beautiful box of sand. And we actually then kind of show what's going on in our world by picking those things that might represent those different issues that we're going through and placing them in our sand tray.
Those are all really cool things that I have never heard about associated with therapy. So tell me a little bit more about the difference between, or the benefits, I guess I should say, of these experiential therapies, or specifically what you do with art, play, and equine assisted
Psychotherapy,
psychotherapy.
yeah.
I was like, okay, I didn't know if I was going to get that one right. But yeah, the benefits of actually doing something.
We're actually creating times of stress within the session. So what if I said to you, hey, we're going to go and use chalk pastels today, which are really messy. They get all over us, and you're really worried about making things perfect and correct. And your anxiety is going up and up and up. And the thing is that there's no consequence if we got art therapy wrong that day. This isn't a test. Your boss isn't going to grade you and make sure that you're paid or not paid based on the benefits of what you created that day. But your brain doesn't know that this is not a stressful experience. In fact, it interprets it as a stressful experience. And so we get to, in that microcosm of the therapy session, play out what that stress might look like, what that anxiety might look like, what that self-doubt and I can't do it and I don't deserve good things, all of those inner beliefs. And then we might say, what if we were able to change this? What if we were able to challenge this? What if we were able to use a coping strategy? Let's try it here right now. Did it work? And in a way, we're actually then practicing in real time, in your real body, with your real anxiety. Because again, your body does not know that there was no problem failing today. Didn't matter. This was a meaningless activity that we're doing. Doesn't matter. Your body and your brain just believe that it's that stressful. And so we get to then see, did that strategy work or not? Because why would I then say, try it at home? Really what we're doing is we're practicing and practicing all of these big things. The other true benefit is we harbor so much inside of our body. And so I was talking with one of my clients the other day, and we were talking about things, and we both have very logical brains, and we're like, yep, that makes perfect sense. Yep, okay. And I said, but did that help any of those inner feelings or beliefs? Like, we have the logic part, we understand,
right?
And they're like, no. And I'm like, exactly. So now we've got to do something to get it outside of our body, outside of our brain. And so what we did was we then switched to an art activity that it's a really cool art therapy activity that we were then able to draw out some of those big things and then get them out of our body so that they didn't have to sit there anymore. And that's the other thing, is that we get to then have these really amazing times of putting our stuff out into the world. First of all, then we can see it and go, did I like that? Did I want to do that again? How would I like to shift this? And then also just to be able to have that relief of having it out of our body instead of sitting there inside of it.
Okay, so can you walk me through like an example of what this, because I know you mentioned, hey, kind of creating a tension and then like implementing a coping strategy.
Yeah.
So what
so
would
we
that
might
look like?
start with, let's say, we're working on a lot of like big feelings of anxiety and difficulty with connecting. And maybe we're at the barn, and I might say, well, today we're going to practice two strategies to help with some of that anxiety. And so we're going to go through them real quick. And one of them is a really simple strategy called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it's noticing 5 things we can see, 4 things we can hear, 3 things we can touch, 2 things we can smell, and 1 thing we can taste in that moment. And that's a grounding technique to allow us to stop and then feel our body and then come back to the present without the, oh no. And so I might say, all right, let's try our 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One of the things that happens is that as our brain's starting to freak out, we're really activated kind of in our brain stem, in our limbic system, like the really old parts of our brain. And the forebrain, the part that doesn't fully grow until we're 27, we got to get the forebrain, that frontal lobe kind of online again, because it turns off when we're freaking out. And so one thing that we can do is rhythm and movement. And so a lot of my teens, a lot of my adults, very music oriented. And so we might just say, all right, we're going to have our Spotify playlist. Which song is going to help in this moment? And we're just going to throw that song on because that music hits the base of our brain and goes, oh yeah, okay, cool. Or we might even just sway, or we might even tap. And so there's lots of different really cool things that we can do in that moment. So we're going to practice our 2 techniques. And let's say we'll take 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and we're going to pick a song. Now, then I'm going to say, all right, now I'm going to probably trigger you. And without telling you how to do anything, here's a halter, go catch and halter a horse. They're all out, open on 5 acres, go for it. Oh, things just got real. And so instantly, sometimes my clients are flooded with like dread, or Marla's setting me up, she wants me to fail. All of these negative cognitions start coming in, and a paralysis, or but you, okay,
how do I do it?
Wow, yeah, okay, wow, okay, so what do we need to do? Let's try 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's try our music and see if we can get regulated again. And what would be the worst thing that happens? You don't catch a horse today, which is meaningless. Okie dokie. Yeah. And so by doing these really small little things, because there's no consequence, there's no problem if it doesn't happen.
Right.
We get to then practice in real time, experiencing these thoughts and feelings, experiencing, living through them, because that's actually a huge piece with anxiety, is that we try and bubble wrap ourselves from every anxious situation. And what that means is that we kind of lose the muscles for how to manage them. And so COVID was like life-saving for many of my clients, because they were having so much social anxiety, so much sensory overload in the school system. Going home was amazing, and they were cured, according to them. The problem is that we also lost all of the muscles for how do I handle the myriad of stuff that happens all day. And what I've done is kind of bubble wrap myself, protect myself, and allow myself not to have to experience so many of those things. And so getting back out there in the world and realizing, I did not explode. I did not catch fire. I didn't just fall on the ground fainting because I got so upset or anxious or whatever. I did it. I lived through it. Oh, I can do this. And that's a really big part of the anxiety, is just being able to help scaffold someone up to being able to move around in their world better. Okay. Doesn't mean anxiety is not there, but how do we work with it? How do we deal with that?
Right. That's interesting, because as you were speaking, I'm like, I'm definitely hearing a lot of around like the social anxieties, but so I wanted to ask an example maybe around, or how is this better for someone that's dealing with that? Because I'm thinking, I'm putting myself in the shoes as just on the other, maybe opposite end of that, where it's like, no social anxieties, put me at all the social things, but those feelings of like, overwhelm, etc. Like all, and you mentioned the perfectionist thing, like all of those things coming up, and like as more comes my way, it's just more of like the do more, keep doing more. And power, like kind of the powering through. Like even when you were talking about doing art, my friend actually got me, I think for Christmas, a really fun coloring book. And I try, and art is not something I like, visual art or like drawing or anything like that. And I'm very into the arts, but that's the one thing I feel like I've always been terrible at. Like my stick figures are ugly. And
Yeah.
I tried one night, like just coloring in this coloring book. I'm not good at matching colors. And then I got all upset because I didn't like the colors that I used in this coloring book.
Yeah. And that's a great example because, we can work through so many things. So I work with children 3 years old all the way up through adults. And we work on a variety of things. And we've talked a lot about anxiety, and that does think social anxiety, but we also can think of anxiety, just more of that perfectionism, the fears of getting things wrong, the overworking. I've worked in addictions and really seen like how much we can, engage in things like working out or tanning or eating or things like gambling, including our substance use. All of this to kind of fill ourselves up with more and more and more, because it's very hard, as we've talked about, to just be and just to stop. And so, for me, that'd be a great example of saying, okay, let's pull out a coloring book. No, I really don't, but I have in the past. But what would happen if your stick figure wasn't good enough? Ultimately, in the
I wouldn't do
world,
it.
nothing happened. Yeah, like other than the fact that you were disappointed.
Right.
But how else has disappointed shown up? How else has perfectionism shown up? How else is being in the moment? That's the most important thing. And so, again, in experiencing time and mindfully experiencing it is so important. So for me, that's just a lovely example because we really do need to be able to go, not good at it, but did I enjoy the process? Did I get out whatever was inside? And so most of the art that we do in art therapy is not pretty because let's face it, if we're getting out all that yuck inside, should it be? Probably not. It's probably pretty awful. And so in those moments when we're getting more and more frustrated because it's not turning out right, knowing that this is not art class, no one needs to do anything good. And that's actually what I model is practically all my figures are stick figures. There's not a lot of good drawing going on when I'm doing the same art therapy technique that my clients are doing.
Yeah.
Because it's not about doing good art.
Yeah. And
we're actually just trying.
Right. And as you're saying that like made sense to me where it was like, hey, if I was doing the coloring book only because of how I thought it was going to look after I finished, I'm missing the purpose.
Yes. And that's one reason why I'm not a big coloring book kind of person. Like I actually teach other clinicians and I teach my clients how to do mandalas, which are drawing inside of a circle. It's one of the mankind's most ancient art forms. And we just use blobs of colors and lines and shapes because I want to free everyone from the idea that it has to look like something. And all it is using the colors that are meaningful to us. And we all have our own color vocabulary where to us, if we think red, we have maybe thoughts and feelings. There's maybe even a taste or a smell that's associated with it. And then even shades of color like light blue versus dark blue have completely different meanings. And that is kind of how we are with colors, except we forget that. And so freeing ourselves from anything of what it should look like, because it might just look like blobs of color, but it's our blobs of color that represent what's going on inside of our lives.
I love that. How does someone know if this type of experiential therapies are right for them?
Most of the time, experiential therapies mean that things are going faster. because what we're doing is we continue to process things week after week, but during the week, our clients are still thinking of it. And so because it's a very physical thing. So there's going to be times where we're like, oh my gosh, this is just like that situation with the rope from the other day. And where we might have used a rope and asked someone for connection, of course, there's someone for connection, or we might have asked them to move away from us because we were uncomfortable with them being so close, and we needed to set a good boundary. And like, oh, it's the rope situation all over again. I need to set my boundaries, and it's like, wow, we have this like kind of visceral remembrance of those things. And they last for years and years and years. I can still remember times in an experiential session with horses, or in art, or in Santre, where I get right back to that flooded moment of, oh my gosh, it's just a moment again, in a good way. Because then I can go, oh, I want to do this different. I don't want to do it my old typical way. And so most of the time, experiential therapies do help us work through things faster, which is nice. I'm all about saying goodbye to clients. I have had clients sometimes for many, many years. And that's because they have such a significant, long-lasting trauma history. But that's not really my default. My default is, can I have you get as healthy, happy, as possible, kind of as quickly as possible, and that might be 6 months, but for 3 of those months, we're only seeing each other every couple weeks because things are going so much better. That would be great. And so it's not like therapy to be fast necessarily, but we want it to be meaningful and purposeful, and we want to help people hopefully as quickly as possible, because no one wants to feel like this for very long. It really lets us practice so that we believe in ourselves when it's actually in a real life situation, so that we can ready ourselves and really feel that we can try it. There's so many times where I've learned a technique, and if I hadn't have practiced it in an experiential manner where I saw that it had been helpful, I am certainly not probably going to remember it, first of all, in a real life situation, or even consider doing it, because it's kind of got no legs, and it also isn't sticky. My brain isn't really focused on it and thinking about it.
What is most rewarding about this work for you?
Seeing how people come up with their own metaphor. So instead of me saying, this is what your life is about, this is what is going on, for them to come up with their own thoughts and feelings, their own metaphors for what are going on, and then we get to run with it. I've had sessions where we'll be doing maybe a sand tray, and someone will pick a figure that for them just represents this really cool idea. And I'm like, I will always think of that client then every time that figure is being picked, because they came up with this really cool metaphor with it. And that represented something in their life, and they were able to guide that. And so it's not me guiding it, but it's them.
I want to know, because I always ask all of our guests this question. What is one thing that you do every day, maybe like an actionable tip for the audience, that makes you feel your best and, allows you to show up as your best self each day?
I'm a sedentary person. I would much rather sit and read a book all day, all night. But that's not very good for me, and it's not very good for my anxiety. And so doing something, being physical, even though that's not really my nature, has been immensely helpful. I also have this really sweet little patio on the back end of our condo, and it's got a waterfall, and we have all these plants that we have, thank goodness, kept alive. And that's a miracle in itself. And sitting out there just for a few minutes every day is so grounding, to hear the birds, to hear the water, to just look around at this greenery is really, really immensely helpful. And so building that into my kind of daily routine, I think
Right.
is a really helpful thing.
Right. Like you mentioned earlier on in the conversation, getting out in nature, and that's like part of your nature and engaging with that.
Yeah. Nature is inherently grounding. And so what starts to happen is that, again, that back of the brain, it's looking for rhythm and movement and sounds. Well, in nature, we start to hear this rhythmic music, and it's maybe the birds or the trees and moving in the wind. And that rhythmic movement, which is also so helpful for the brain. Um, and so many metaphors come up. I mean, I remember a session where we had a whole session because a rabbit decided to walk up to us, hop up to us, and was standing about 8 feet away from us. And we're like, it knows we're here, right? I mean, it's a wild animal. It does not have to be here. And it's just, and then it froze. And so we talked about how rabbits maybe rabbit up, maybe that's their freeze. And then we had a whole conversation about fight, flight, freeze, faint, fawn, and all of our other trauma responses. And just because a rabbit decided to hop on over for some reason.
That's so funny. This has been, Marla, this has been such a great conversation. I've enjoyed learning from you. I'd love for you to share how people can learn more about you, your website, social media, all the things.
Thank you. Yes, this has been such a joy to talk. So people can find more information on my website, bergercounselingservices.com. And my social media handle is Berger Counseling Services, Facebook and Instagram. And so you get to learn all about me under my About Us page, but also my wonderful clinicians who work with me, Christine, Valerie, JC, and Nadia. And so I also offer lots of different workshops and trainings, both on demand and live in person, including one on nature play therapy coming on up. And that's something that I think we get to learn. Us clinicians get to learn lots of new techniques, and that's something that I love doing, trainings and workshops, so that people can learn lots of new things. But I also learn from them as well, because they'll come up with some really cool activity, and I'm like, that is the most amazing thing ever, and I am so going to use that myself in my own practices.
I love that. I'm looking forward to the one on nature play therapy. And we'll make sure to link to all of your links below in the show notes so everyone can find you easily. Marla, this has been awesome. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we go?
Oh no, just that I hope everyone takes a minute, maybe tries 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and really enjoys the day.
Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you. You gave me a lot to think about, and I'm sure we'll stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Marla. I know I learned so much. I'm looking forward to checking out more of what she has coming out as far as her workshops, and all of her information there on the website. You can find that linked below in the show notes, as well as her social media. So make sure to connect with her and her team. And hey, also connect with me. I tell you every other week, just in case you haven't, you can find me all the places, but I'd especially love to connect with you on LinkedIn, as well as on Instagram and YouTube, where you can find new episodes of this podcast every other week. So make sure you go there, hit subscribe, and turn on those notifications, because I'd hate for you to miss out. So when I see you back in 2 weeks, because I know I'll see you then, stay happy, stay healthy.